everyone. I hope you're all creating a great day. My name is Chantale. I'm a grateful recovering addict, and I'm really excited to share with everyone today. So first, I'd like to set the stage for today's share. And no, I'm not trying to direct the show. I'm just, for some of you who may not know me. So a few weeks ago, when I was asked to share at this meeting, I was prompted not to look back, but to look ahead. This meant that I couldn't really rely on my previous messages, but would need to dig a little deeper so that God could do a new thing. It was kind of scary, honestly. For those who know me, I've always said that God connects the dots between his word and my life, and he's done it again. In this process of preparing this message, I've actually finally been able to work through the one step. Wow. So going back a little bit, in March of this year, John asked me what was the context that I was planning to undertake, AKA what was my first step issue. Of spending, I'm a codependent, chaos creator, controller, fixer, I react in anger, and I'm a compulsive overeater. John replied, so everything but crack cocaine then. And you know, pridefully, I thought, surely all these things are not as toxic or as damaging as the use of drugs. Then I was reading through Melanie Beattie's book, and on page 45, she talks about what some of the characteristics are of codependence, particularly codependence in denial. Ouch, this really resonated with me. Workaholism, check. Compulsive spender or materialism, check. Mentally obsessive, check. Staying busy and compulsive overeating. Wow, I've come to recognize that not only am I powerless over these behaviors or codependency, but over many, many areas in my life. And the one that I think I need to have freedom from now is the compulsive overeating and the sugar addiction. This is very daunting. And perhaps it explains why I've often felt like I was switching addictions or transferring obsessions, gaining some freedom in one area while actually losing ground in another. Since I've been doing meetings since March, I've been reading a daily reader called Serenity, a companion to 12-step recovery. And that prompted me to actually assess the magnitude and the gravity of what my compulsive behaviors and addictions have cost me. The process, although simple, has been challenging and enlightening. For every dependency that I could name, I identified the behavior, what I actually hope to gain by the behavior, and the costs or loss resulting from each dependency and compulsive behavior. I'd like to start with sharing the ones that I've already been free from, mostly to encourage myself, but also to encourage others. And I'm going to keep it short. I mean, this itself could probably be a 20-minute message, so I'll keep it high level. So workaholic. I was a workaholic straight through to 2013. At the time in my journey, I was seeking recognition, appreciation, and value. I really felt that my job would give me that sense of self-worth. As a result, I lost my job. I was burnt out, and I was dealing with clinical depression. This really fed a lot of my fears and anxieties of being a single mom and having to go and put myself out there and look for a job. And I kid you not, for 6 weeks, I was not sleeping. Thankfully, I did find a job, and workaholism has never been a problem since. The second, materialism, compulsive spending, specifically with me, it was in the context of online shopping. It's something I haven't known freedom from in a very long time, but I think other people may recognize that they have that challenge too. And in my case, I was looking for satisfaction, proving that I could manage money, that I deserved it, and I could earn, because I'd earned it, I could choose how to spend it. As a result, I had tens of thousands of dollars in debt, and I was in bondage to anxiety, always checking, you know, what was the minimum payment I made so I can turn around and buy something shiny and new. Thankfully, in December, I asked my husband to connect with me on that, and I started attending meetings, and it hasn't been a problem, but it definitely held me for a good decade of my life. The third that I know freedom in is mentally obsessing. This would, for me, look like problem solving for every possible scenario, trying to understand, wanting to do things perfectly so I could please others. I guess it's similar to the workaholisms. I hoped to gain acceptance, approval, and unconditional love, and that was directly from my parents. As a result, I lived crippled with fear. I was on high alert all the time, had high stress for no known reason. And the last three are compulsive overeating, sugar addiction, codependency, which actually involves criticism, skepticism, and judging. Um, I'll touch on codependency because of all the isms and because of sort of my new awareness around it and things that I've been able to confess and now start some healing. So, in terms of codependency, out of a desperate need to be right, my response had been to set traps. Yeah, set traps. Catch others in their lies, their behaviors, and their addictions. Another response out of the codependency was a result of my need for control. And because I needed control so desperately, when I didn't have it, I created chaos to then have control. All this while convincing myself that I was only being helpful and useless. It's safe to say that this caused alienation from friends, family members. I neglected my self-care for years and years and years. And even I could have cared for my children differently if I hadn't been obsessing over the lives of others. Another one that I've started working through as a result of preparing for this message today is keeping busy by choosing to be easily distracted. So for me, that looks like investing a lot of time and money in self-help resources. I was hoping to gain an understanding of myself because I had a need to prove that I wasn't crazy or different. And I also could not bear to continue hearing the lies that said I wasn't good enough, I don't matter, I don't deserve it. And I felt that with understanding, I could understand the whys and then perfectly apply the how. This, I think, has been the biggest barrier to my spiritual connection with God. I had been pursuing the small g of reason, the small God of my own understanding, instead of connecting spiritually with God. And honestly, chasing the belief and the lie that I was only one TED talk or one book away from understanding all the whys in my life. I'm very grateful that I have a sponsor who can help me through this. And I love how once I get it, I can more easily apply it. So really good. So coming back to my statement about believing that, perhaps my human condition was not as troublesome. Based on this look of this table I put together, I think it is as troublesome. I may not have used drugs or alcohol, but I would sort of create the perfect environment to have an adrenaline boost or a dopamine boost, whatever it was to fuel my brain. And for years, I've imagined that I was in control. Now that I know differently, what am I going to do about it? Well, in the past few months, I've been able to admit, acknowledge, and make known, at least verbally, that I'm powerless. This has meant going to meetings, asking for help, leaning on others. Today, though, as a result of working step one, and with all of you here, I'm ready to finally accept the reality that I'm living with a disease that alters my brain's function. The chemicals I am feeding my brain are controlling me. By choosing to accept this as my reality, that means I cannot consume large amounts of food, especially sugar, if I want my brain to be healthy and functional. I had an experience about 3 weeks ago where I had actually been messing with sugar. And for 48 to 72 hours afterwards, I had migraines, brain fog, no energy, so I needed to sleep. My mood was really low, which now I see as it's probably the sugar that creates the low mood, not just that the low mood is hanging around. And that's made me gravely aware of how unmanageable that is and has been for me. Unfortunately, though, I still find myself resisting the changes, but I'm trying to do better. Now that I can admit and agree, I can rid myself of resistance and denial, and I can start applying the step one to each of my problems. I know it might seem backward, But I'm starting to realize that when you can accept that you don't have power, you can actually access the power you need. I'm so grateful for that spiritual connection with God. Choosing acceptance looks like surrendering my need to understand and my illusion of control. I need to admit that I cannot overcome if I don't invite God in my circumstances. At the start of my recovery, I began using a 1-minute pause app to check in with myself so that I could quickly overcome fixes. Currently, I'm actually using the mental portion of that app, which actually talks about having the mind of God and having my speculations or my imagination or my understanding aligned with God. I find it's been really helpful with some of my cravings. I admit that there are frequent pauses, but I think that's great and important for me where I'm at right now with my spiritual connection. And there's a nice sentence in the app that actually calls me to release everyone and everything to God. And I find those words bring a lot of comfort for me. So now that I know that this is my reality, what should I do about it? What am I going to do about it? So at my Tuesday meeting last week, we dug into chapter 12 of Codependent No More. Melody Beattie talks about the art of acceptance. She says that acceptance reality is touted and encouraged. It's a beneficial act which brings peace. It is frequently the turning point for change. However, it is also much easier said than done. And I agree with that because I've spent the last 6 months, actually even longer with the overeating. I've been aware for 7 years that I'm an overeater. So accepting where we're at and where we are and how we're doing is not always easy. And the additional layer in my case has been because I've been a worrier or I've made fear-based decisions because I've always looked at the past or the future in anxiety instead of looking at the moment. It means that I have a lot of difficulty with any actual change in the day of, and that can actually set me off. So some days my expectations are met, life is good, everything's acceptable, and going through the days is a breeze. But there's other days where things change. There's a problem. Things are different. Maybe I'm losing something. Maybe my circumstances have been altered, but I'm no longer comfortable. I have these new situations to accept, and I'm not at peace in reality. It feels awkward, and I lose balance. Perhaps actually the most painful loss I've faced as a codependent married to a recovering addict is the loss of my dreams, the hopeful and sometimes idealist expectations for the future. Even recovery brings losses, more changes that I struggle to accept because he's working his recovery. Things change, patterns of relating change, his moods change as he contends with emotions, grief, and forgiveness. Then after a while, I finally begin to hope again, only to have my dreams change because of a relapse. So I encourage you today, if things are ever to be any different, we must accept reality. If things are ever to be replaced like lost dreams, so that I can feel sane and peaceful again, I must accept reality. That reality, that reality is that I live with a recovering addict and have no control over his recovery and much less him. How much greater is our relationship today because I have surrendered that? So just a definition of acceptance. It doesn't mean adaptation. It doesn't mean resignation. It certainly doesn't mean accepting or tolerating any sort of abuse. It means that for the present moment, I acknowledge and accept my circumstances and the people in my life exactly as they are. Melody Beattie says, acceptance is the ultimate paradox. We cannot change who we are until we accept ourselves the way we are. It feels like I've had it backwards all these years. Practically speaking, as I worked step 1, I've actually walked through the process of acceptance using the 5 steps. You might have heard this in the context of grieving, but I find any loss that keeps us stuck where we're at deserves to be examined and looked at through this 5-step process. Interestingly enough, denial is the first step, the one that I've most often found myself in, and now know for a fact that that is where most of my codependent tendencies are expressed. That's where I obsess, I control, I repress feelings, um, and I manipulate, sadly. The second step would be anger. And here I caution you based on my own experience. If it's vented thoughtlessly, it can hurt others and destroy relationships. If it's bottled up inside, it can cause us to become bitter and destroy us from within. If nursed, we give the enemy an opportunity to divide us. The third step is bargaining. This could be reasonable and productive. It could be like me telling my partner, if we go to counseling, we don't lose our relationship. Or it can be absurd, like if I keep the house spotlessly clean and cook great meals, then my parents wouldn't drink anymore. Out of this very absurd bargaining is where my people pleasing and perfectionism came about. The fourth step is depression. On page 137, Esther Olson calls it forgiveness process. It will disappear, she says, only when the process has been worked out and through. And that is something I've started to recognize as a recovering addict, is how important it is for me to follow through on my word, whether that's a word to myself, a word to my spiritual connection, a word to my children or to my husband. You can't skip the steps, and you can't skip this process either. And commitment truly means follow through. The last step, of course, is acceptance. This is not about happiness, but release from pain. It's knowing that the struggle is over. What I've learned through preparing this message is that grief is complex and messy. It's rarely a linear process. Yet grieving is exactly the requirement I need for cleansing my wounds so that healing can begin. And from this point, you and I can gain a sense of serenity by accepting that it's all right with me. Now, what am I going to do about it? So the line from my title, I actually took from the AA book. It's on page 449 of the second edition. It's chapter 16, Acceptance Was the Answer, page 407 to 420. But I'm going to read mostly from page 417 and pick up through page 420. He sums it up so beautifully, like it cannot not be read. So he starts, now what am I going to do about it? When I stopped living in the problem and began living in the answer, the problem went away. From that moment on, I have not had a single compulsion to drink. And acceptance is the answer to all my problems today. When I am disturbed, it is because I find some person, place, thing, or situation, some fact of my life unacceptable to me. And I can find no serenity until I accept that person, place, thing, or situation as being exactly the way it's supposed to be at this moment. Nothing, absolutely nothing happens in God's world by mistake. Until I could accept my alcoholism, I could not stay sober unless I accept life completely on life's terms. I cannot be happy. I need to concentrate not so much on what needs to be changed in the world as on what needs to be changed in me and in my attitude. He goes on to say, I was the chief critic. I was always able to see the flaw in every person, every situation, and I was always glad to point it out because I knew you wanted perfection, just as I did. That really resonated with me in context of getting outside of myself. AA and acceptance have taught me that there is a bit of good in the worst of us and a bit of bad in the best of us, that we are all children of God, and we each have a right to be here. When I complain about me or about you, I am complaining about God's handiwork. I am saying that I know better than God. And then on page 419, with a little bit from 420, this was really helpful to me because he's talking about his marriage relationship. And there were things, little nuggets that I was able to take away and just look at differently. So he says, then one day in AA, I was told that I had the lens in my glasses backward. The courage to change in the serenity prayer meant not that I should change my marriage, but rather that I should change myself and learn to accept my spouse as she was. AA has given me a new pair of glasses. I can again focus on my wife's good qualities and watch them grow and grow and grow. Today, my wife and I try to communicate what we feel rather than what we think. We used to argue about our different ideas, but we can't argue about our feelings. I can tell her she ought not to think a certain way, but I certainly cannot take away her right to feel however she does feel. When we deal in feelings, we tend to come to know ourselves and each other better. Then he goes on to say, perhaps the best thing of all for me is to remember that my serenity is inversely proportionate to my expectations. The higher my expectations of my wife and other people, the lower is my serenity. I can watch my serenity level rise when I discount my expectations, but when my rights try to move in and they too can force my serenity level down, I have to disregard my rights as well as my expectations by asking myself, how important is it really? How important is it compared to my serenity, my emotional sobriety? Acceptance is the key to my relationship with God today. I never just sit and do nothing while waiting for Him to tell me what to do. Rather, I do whatever is in front of me to be done, and I leave the results to Him. However it turns out, that's God's will for me. I must keep my magic magnifying mind on my acceptance and off my expectations, for my serenity is directly proportional to my level of acceptance. I aspire to be there one day, and I actually want to encourage each one of us, particularly today, to take a look at your first step issues. Well, mine were issues. Perhaps you only have one issue, and ask yourself what you're going to do about it.